Tell me if this sounds familiar to you. You go to open up your sprint board, whether it be Azure DevOps, Jira, Trello, or whatever tool you happen to be using. And once your board is open, you're bombarded with user stories, tasks, unparented items, dentist appointments, you name it, a whole bunch of random stuff. All this noise distracts you from actually focusing on the work that's actually important. What if I told you that you could have a sprint board that only had the user stories that your team was actually working on and their subsequent tasks, allowing you to focus on what was actually crucial for the sprint? Well, I'd say that sounds like some scrumptious agility. I'm Jeff Stemple, Certified Scrum Master through Scrum Alliance. I'm here to improve your knowledge and empower you to transform your Scrum team. Today, I want to talk to you about the Sprint Board and how you can make your life and the lives of your Scrum team easier by simplifying what you put on your board in the first place. I'll give you 5 things that you should put on your board and 5 things you should stay far, far away from. A lot of teams are probably using their sprint board wrong. And sadly, they were likely taught this by an agile coach who didn't know what they were doing, and that coach taught them to do it this way. The sprint board, or the sprint backlog as we call it in Scrum, is meant for the developers, and note, we're talking about Scrum developers, to formulate a plan to accomplish the sprint goal. As the Scrum Guide says, the sprint backlog is a plan by and for the developers. It is a highly visible, real-time picture of the work that the developers plan to accomplish during the sprint in order to achieve the sprint goal. Consequently, the sprint backlog is updated throughout the sprint as more is learned. It should have enough detail that they can inspect their progress in the daily Scrum. So that sounds great in theory, right? But what does it mean in practice? Well, I'm glad you asked. First and foremost, the user stories or product backlog items as they're called in Scrum should be on your board. Each story should have been estimated within a refinement session and discussed by the team during sprint planning. Second, the team should try to break up the story into smaller pieces. In Azure DevOps, we call them tasks. Each task should ideally be a maximum of days worth of work so that it's easier to break apart for other people on the team to work on or to encourage discussion in the daily Scrum. Tasking is typically done during sprint planning, but the team can add additional tasks throughout the sprint as new work is discovered, or they can also remove tasks if it turns out that they're no longer needed or necessary. Third, the team should have some sense of swim lanes on their board. Typically, these show the progress of the stories or tasks and where the item happens to be in development. Most basic swim lanes are not started, in progress, and completed. The team can ultimately decide which lanes they want to adapt onto their board. This helps them to have visibility and transparent to each other, their Scrum Master, the product owner, and even any stakeholders that happen to be interested in looking at the board. Fourth, the team should not call out any blocking issues preventing the user stories or tasks from getting completed. Typically, issues might be that a recent deployment is causing the app to not work, environment issues that the team can dig in and fix, or the app isn't behaving as expected for a particular feature. Do not point these issues. Just call them out as separate issues. They're separate work. Fifth, the sprint board is a great place to track what was discussed because the action items in retro should be something that can be measurable and achievable within the context of the next sprint. If you aren't tracking it on the board, it can easily get lost in the shuffle or even dismissed altogether. The Scrum Guide suggests that adding these action items onto the sprint board, and if the guide suggests this, it's good enough for me, and I say go ahead and do it. In short, your sprint board should be a representation of reality. Suppose the team identifies that work needs to be done to fix a blocking issue, like a code change, a config change, or some type of work the team is responsible for. In that case, a new product backlog item, or a bug, a defect, or whatever your organization happens to call them, should be created, pointed, and prioritized with your product owner. The team may pull this into the current sprint, and if they are pulling something like this into the current sprint, they should probably pull something at the bottom of the priority out, or put it on the backlog if it isn't a priority. Now that we've gone over what should be on your sprint board, let's call out the things that shouldn't be on your sprint board. Number 1, appointments, meetings, happy hours. I shouldn't have to call this out, but I've seen it, and that's why it's on the list. The board is there to track the work that the team is doing to help achieve the sprint goal. These meetings don't provide value. They don't have deliverables, and they certainly don't give any useful information except tracking people's time and micromanaging, which isn't a Scrum value, last I checked. Everyone has a calendar, so put those meetings there. If the team agrees to openly share, create a team calendar and put these events there. Unless this was an action item called out in your last retro, it shouldn't be on your board. And number 2, Scrum Master or Product Owner work. So the sprint board belongs to the developers and should only have user stories that the developers have decided to work on towards the sprint goal. Since the Scrum Master and Product Owner do not contribute work to the sprint or towards the sprint goal, none of their work should be tracked on this board, unless it's related to action items that came out of the last retro. Number 3, onboarding tasks or computer setup tasks. Similar to point 1, these tasks are usually created to give the appearance that our coworkers are working on important sprint work. But again, these items don't provide value towards the sprint goal. If we need to spend time helping others with onboarding or computer setup, the best practice would be reduce team members' capacity during sprint planning by however many days that they need and adjust the planned workload accordingly. Number 4, random research tasks unrelated to the sprint work. Research is valuable, don't get me wrong. However, this work can be done when developers have time between or after their sprint work is completed. This isn't to be confused with any research necessary to begin work on a story, research task, if you will. In fact, I encourage it if it's going to help you provide better value and get acclimated to the work that you're about to do. Number 5, training. Again, like the items already mentioned, training does not typically provide value to the sprint goal. If somebody is going to be out for training or the team has mandatory training that is required by your company, best practice again would be to call this out during sprint planning and adjust the team's capacity for the upcoming sprint. Call out whoever is going to be out for training, treat them as if they're out of office, and reduce your team's capacity for the upcoming sprint. The team can always pull more work in if the training doesn't happen to take as long. You get the idea. Don't put anything on the sprint board that isn't directly related to the work you set out to do from the team's plan from sprint planning. Before I leave you, I wanted to call out a few other best practices that aren't related to the do's and don'ts. As mentioned multiple times in this video, the sprint board belongs to the developers, including QA and other roles. When we talk about developers in Scrum, we're talking about anybody on the developer team. That means no one besides the developers should be adding or removing stories from the board. Not the team members, managers, not the product owner, and not even the Scrum Master. If you made it this far and found this video helpful, please drop a like, hit the subscribe button, and ring the bell icon so that you will be notified whenever I upload more videos. If you have questions, ideas for future videos, or even disagree with what I said, drop a comment. I'd love to hear what I got wrong, because I, for one, like to learn. And that's how we get better at what we do. And remember, be agile, stay scrumptious.